Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, May 17th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the Pennsylvania Senate Republican primary that is set to occur and actually finish in just a few hours. Now, it might be a little late talking about this video. I had a dentist appointment today and I was very busy, but we are going to be covering it because it will be very interesting to see what the results actually are, and pretty much we're just talking about how really muddled this race has gotten now that we are in the final stretch of the campaign. Looking at many other primaries that are set to occur today, most of them have been decided months ago. We knew who was going to win in many of these cases, and more recently, we've begun to paint a better picture as to who is going to win in the Pennsylvania Republican primary on the governor's side. But the Senate side is still very tricky. And the reason why it's tricky is because of one candidate in specific. It's not McCormick, it's not Oz, but rather Kathy Barnette. Someone who has now surged to popularity over the past 2 weeks alone that has landed her in a position where she very well could win this primary this evening. Right now, Dr. Oz maintains a 2.6% lead across the rest of the candidates. That's not all that impressive when you take into account that Dr. Oz is a very recognizable name and has received the endorsement of President Trump. At the end of the day, Kathy Barnette really poses a major threat to Dr. Oz more than anyone, simply because now she is in a second place point where just 2 weeks ago, she was a distant third. And I mean that in a very literal sense. You take a look at May 3rd, 2022, Kathy Barnette was at 12.5% with Oz at 19.5, McCormick at 17.5. The point being that the results have necessarily changed, but you can see just how much they have in just a short period of time. Previously, it was a two-way race between the top two contenders there. Now, we've seen an inclusion of a third candidate who very well could win this at the end of the day. If you go back a month ago, back to where we were actually April 14th, so just over a month ago, Kathy Barnette was in fourth place, losing to another candidate there. And at the start of the primary season, she was actually performing worse than any other candidate now being pulled out of the number 5. So looking at at least where we stand right now, we have seen a sudden surge for Kathy Barnette as we have gotten further and further up our major primary here that could truly determine the balance of power depending on who ends up winning the Senate race in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, the interesting thing about Kathy Barnette is that the Republican Party is now in a position where they could nominate a black woman to be the Senate candidate for them in the state of Pennsylvania. It would be a very good look for the GOP to have diverse candidates, especially in a state that otherwise doesn't nominate those super diverse candidates that you otherwise might expect. Seeing Kathy Barnette, too, as someone who was an attendee of the January 6th insurrection, she does come with a bit of baggage. Dr. Oz, on the other hand, comes with the baggage in the fact that he doesn't live in the state of Pennsylvania, and also the fact that he seems to be doing this out of political opportunism and not because he actually cares. Now, I do think there are also implications well beyond the Senate race here, but also about the impact and influence of President Trump. He has made some very good choices in other states, but in the state of Pennsylvania, I wouldn't exactly say that he has made very exceptional choices. If you take a look at who he endorsed, it was Dr. Oz, and that endorsement came as a result of Dr. Oz giving him a good reputation when it comes down to his health on national television, in addition to his ratings. Donald Trump directly mentioned these factors as a reason why he made the endorsement for Dr. Oz. So Dr. Oz probably should have soared to this election, but for some main reason, he isn't. Is it Donald Trump? Probably not. But would Dr. Oz be in this position without Donald Trump? Also probably not. So it's interesting to see that we are now in an extremely competitive race, in a three-way race between the top contenders here, Mehmet Oz, Kathy Barnette, and David McCormick. These are the top contenders in the state. We will see what happens by the end of this evening. But it is this last-minute surge from Kathy Barnette that I think the Republican Party should also be partially worried about, because it does sort of make a big statement about where the Pennsylvania Republican Party is right now. Doug Mastriano is a name that you might recognize from yesterday's video talking about the Pennsylvania governor's race, and it's a name that should be recognized. He is the Republican frontrunner, and polls that have just been released today even show that he is the frontrunner in the state of Pennsylvania by a quite large amount. And if you're talking about the Republican primary here, I think he's up an average of 10, 15, 20 points. And Doug Mastriano is someone who was a proud attendee of the January 6th insurrection. I use the term insurrection because I think that is the fairest way to describe what occurred on that day. But what had happened was that Doug Mastriano was subpoenaed by the January 6th committee. You are talking about a committee that is investigating the Capitol attack, and they are directly implicating Doug Mastriano, the GOP potential nominee for governor. Now, just yesterday, we find out that Kathy Barnette did, in fact, also attend the January 6th insurrection. They find that photos of her there are genuine, and she even declares herself in a way that a hero of sorts would, trying to say that she was there to have a 1776 moment, referencing the revolution of the United States. I mean, what had happened was that she is directly mentioning the American Revolution, comparing it to the January 6th insurrection, and it is quite unfortunate for the GOP if they were to have two insurrectionists standing as their top two contenders in the general election. If anything, she is extreme. I think Kathy Barnette definitely has taken stances that would otherwise be viewed as extreme by more moderate voters. That's why I think partially Democrats even want to have her as their major contender. I would say the most electable Republican out of the group is the third place candidate, David McCormick. While he very much is a candidate that is still within the Republican Party, still someone who is associated and will be eventually associated with President Trump should he win this nomination tonight, he doesn't have the baggage that the other two do. Dr. Oz, being someone who is viewed as an opportunist, someone who doesn't care about the state of Pennsylvania, is doing this out of his own political ambition rather than trying to service the people. Kathy Barnette, who has the baggage of the January 6th insurrection, has the baggage of previous comments that she has made. Pretty much someone who had also said that the 2020 election was stolen from her when she ran in Pennsylvania's 4th congressional district and lost by about 19 points across the district, refused to concede in that race. You have two bad candidates that are serving in the top two, and this last-minute search from Kathy Barnette has pushed David McCormick down to third, despite him being the strongest candidate. McCormick, even for a period of time, was in the lead over Oz. While Donald Trump's endorsement was expected and did result in a bump for him, David McCormick was ahead statewide. He was ahead with 20%, 21%. At one point, he was at 23% of the vote. Now he has dropped back down to 20%. Kathy Barnette, on the other hand, from that point where David McCormick was at 23%, was at 9%. Today, she stands at 24%. Her entrance and her inclusion into this race is the reason why Dr. Oz and David McCormick are no longer neck and neck, which means McCormick, the best GOP candidate here, could very well come into third place. This is where the problem lies for the GOP. It has completely shaken up the primary, but beyond that, there are severe electoral implications should Kathy Barnette or Mehmet Oz win the Republican nomination this evening. And as unfortunate as it is for the GOP, these two are the favorites to do so. And when you take a look at even just my ratings in the state of Pennsylvania, you find that both on the Senate and governor level, I expect the same thing. I think the Democrats will win both races. That's because the GOP is in very much disarray, but based off the top two contenders, I don't think this rating would change. If anything, it would change against the Republican Party. And based off of who's leading right now in the Pennsylvania GOP primary, I'd do the exact same thing for the governor elections. So my thing about this is that the Republican Party really could have had a much better candidate. I think what we find in this last-minute surge is that voters in the Republican Party in Pennsylvania want someone who does represent a diverse background. I saw this tweet this morning, actually, that was quite interesting and did sort of put things into context about where the GOP stands in Pennsylvania. It is a diverse crowd, at least relative to what previous nominees have been. You have a Muslim man as ranked number 1 in the overall average, and a black woman as ranked number 2 in the overall average. That sounds like something you wouldn't exactly expect from the state of Pennsylvania in the Republican primary. It's just not what you would expect when it comes down to campaign history, to candidate history. Who has the Republican Party fielded before? Who are they fielding now? It is very interesting, but I don't think at any point really that that's something that is a determining factor within the Republican primary. I do think, however, it does show that there are more diverse candidates running as Republicans in this election year, and this is a prime example of that. But of course, there are many factors beyond that that do lead up to someone running for the nomination, running and actually winning the nomination, and we will see who ends up on the top of it by the end of today. Now, when it comes down to electability in the general election, we have to take a look at some of these polls, because John Fetterman and Conor Lamb are pretty much presumed to be the top two contenders. John Fetterman mostly the top contender when it comes down to the Democratic primary there. And what you find is that polling between the two shows that Conor Lamb does worse than John Fetterman, but they still beat potential matchups between other Republicans. For instance, John Fetterman defeats Dr. Oz by about 2 points. You take a look at other numbers and show that John Fetterman was leading against Sean Parnell in previous polls, but Sean Parnell was actually beating Conor Lamb. Now, these are very, I would say, a few polls. We barely have any from the state of Pennsylvania in the general election, mainly because we don't know who's going to be the Republican nominee, and we have a general idea who's going to be the Democratic nominee, but health complications for John Fetterman has really sort of shaken up the campaign in the final few days. What we are finding from the state of Pennsylvania is that the general election is likely to be very, very contentious, and the Republicans need every single person on deck. They need the best candidate that they can have, because Democrats, quite frankly, have some pretty strong potential nominees. For instance, John Fetterman, Malcolm Kenyatta, Conor Lamb, all of these candidates would perform well in the general election. I think Conor Lamb could win. I think John Fetterman could win. The GOP, on the other hand, I wouldn't be so confident. I do think that David McCormick could win the general election. I think Dr. Oz could win. I think Kathy Barnette could win. But when it comes down to a point of who would be the most electable, I would say not the top two. I said this multiple times. David McCormick, I think, is the strongest potential GOP nominee, yet he comes down to third. Earlier on, he was doing a lot better. I mean, it is just quite interesting to see how the best candidate, I would say, for the GOP doesn't seem to be performing that well. But I do think also that the Republican Party is in a point where they didn't really have the best candidates running. The Democrats had the lieutenant governor of the state of Pennsylvania and a U.S. representative that have flipped a Trump plus 20 district back in 2018. The Republicans, on the other hand, based off of the titles, you have a former CEO, surgeon and television host, and an author as the top three, a political commentator from Fox News. These are not the people I envisioned running when we knew it was going to be an open seat, when Pat Toomey decided that he was going to step down. I knew it was going to be someone like Sean Parnell, someone who was able to get the endorsement from Trump early on and cleared the field from the very beginning. But looking at those who declined, who did you have? You had Donald Trump Jr., who I honestly think could have been a stronger candidate than any of these three. You also had Pat Toomey. He could have ran for re-election. He didn't. Keith Rothfuss, he is a former U.S. representative. You have Mike Kelly, a current U.S. representative. You have people who have won elections that could have ran, and yet all you have are people that have never stepped foot in political office before. Might have ran for something, but might have lost. The GOP in the state of Pennsylvania does not impress me with their array of candidates. But it is clear who is the strongest one out of them all. But it is also clear who is likely to do well this evening. I don't have a prediction for the primary. Part of me would like to believe that Dr. Oz is going to win, but my gut is telling me that Kathy Barnette is probably going to, just simply because of this last-minute surge that I don't know if the polls are able to reflect in the final few days of a campaign season. But of course, I could be entirely proven wrong. David McCormick could come from that third-place spot and end up winning. I'm just not going to make a prediction in this point until maybe an hour before the polls actually close. I will be live streaming tonight's election as well, so I hope that you go ahead and check that out. But looking at where we stand right now, the GOP doesn't exactly have the best top-tier candidates. What I think is going to happen at this point is that we are likely going to see a Fetterman victory, and the GOP is going to nominate someone. Regardless of who it is, I think the race still starts out with an advantage for the Democratic Party. The generic ballot is not on the Democratic Party side, but I do think that Josh Shapiro being on the governor's side and Doug Mastriano being on the GOP side does hinder the Republican Party at least slightly. Regardless of who wins the Senate election, you can't avoid the very obvious fact that the Republican frontrunner in the state of Pennsylvania in the governor election is going to weigh them down. And he also is going to be just as important of a ticket, especially as Roe v. Wade looks like it's going to be struck down in just about a few weeks. When you have all eyes focused on governor elections in addition to congressional elections, where in other races it might just be the presidential and congressional, or just congressional. In this case, there is a lot going on. And in the current national environment, I think the Democratic Party will struggle and they will fight for it. But I do think they will still be able to win in the state of Pennsylvania, both on the governor level and on the Senate level. It will be interesting to see what happens after tonight's election. There will be some changes in ratings, at least potentially, depending on who wins the general elections here. But overall, I think that we are really confused about where the Pennsylvania Republican Senate primary is going to go. This last-minute surge has really messed things up for a bunch of these candidates here, Dr. Oz and David McCormick, but I think the only person who really comes out on top at the end of the day here is Kathy Barnette. But in the general election, it's very hard to determine who actually would come out on top. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.